Hey friends, welcome back. This is episode number 40, the nervous system and trauma recovery. Welcome to the Depth of Echoes podcast, where we dive deep into mental illness. Our goal is to reclaim community and healing for those that are suffering with mental illnesses through education and empathy. Please remember that we are not medical professionals, and the guests that are interviewed on the show are providing general information and sharing their experiences. Please check with your healthcare provider before adding, removing, or changing any part of your treatment plan or medications. This show may contain stories with violence, situations of a sexual nature, or content that may be otherwise triggering, so please be kind to yourself and take a breather, fast forward, or skip an episode entirely if you need to. Every story should have the space to be told, but not every story is for every listener, and that's okay. We love you, and we're glad that you're here. Welcome back to our journey into trauma. In episode number 39, we did a lot of background work and laid some really important groundwork. So if you haven't listened yet, I'd really recommend going back and giving it a try. We're going to assume going forward that trauma is present in each of us. We're just going to acknowledge how prevalent that it is, especially if we remember all of the ways that trauma can happen that we talked about in episode number 39. That's kind of just part of what being trauma informed is about. You're just acknowledging it, not trying to change it or manipulate data. You're just accepting it and moving forward. Previously, we also talked about the 3 phases of trauma recovery. Number 1 is safety and stability. Number 2 is remembrance and mourning. And number 3 is reconnection and integration. In stage number 1, it's really important that we reestablish safety and stability within the physical body. That's really a big part of what needs to happen in that phase. And in order to do that, it's really helpful if we can get to know the nervous system. Dr. Stephen Porges is a distinguished university scientist and a professor in the Department of Psychiatry. He coined the term Neuroception back in 1994 to describe how the neural circuits distinguish whether or not people or places are safe, dangerous, or life-threatening. Because of our heritage as a species, neuroception takes place in a more primitive part of the brain without conscious awareness. The detection of a person as safe or dangerous triggers neurobiologically determined prosocial or defensive behaviors. We have essentially 2 states of being that are kind of constantly at war, the defensive and the prosocial. When we're in defensive mode, we can't be in prosocial mode. We have to suppress our default defense system in order to be in that prosocial mode. Even though it's really hard to realize what's happening, your neuroceptive system is constantly scanning. It's got 2 things to do. It's got to assess risk, and then if the environment looks safe, it needs to inhibit that primitive defense system and that primitive response to fight or flee, so that you can engage in those prosocial behaviors and activities. Now, defensive mode doesn't necessarily mean that you're running at 90 miles an hour or that you're constantly standing around with your shield up. It means that we're kind of constantly scanning in an observation mode, checking and making sure that there's no internal systems monitors saying that there are signs of dangers. American social psychologist C. Daniel Batson explains that, on the other hand, prosocial behaviors refer to a broad range of actions intended to benefit one or more people other than oneself. Behaviors such as helping, comforting, and cooperation. Basically, what he's saying there is that we essentially have to inhibit our defenses in order to love and care for each other in a reciprocal way. If our defense systems can't disengage, or they're hyper-reactive to danger cues, they can have us living our whole lives in that mode, which means we're truly unable to engage in a deep way. That means that the giving and receiving in community isn't happening, the dance of reciprocity that really is life. We are a communal species, whether you think we evolved that way or created that way. We need community. It gives our lives meaning, purpose, and hope. Now, in episode number 39, we went over some of the ways that trauma happens And often at the core, there's a failure in community somehow. We could have domestic abuse, rape, human trafficking, war. When we were in need, those around us didn't come to help, or they failed us. They didn't intervene. They didn't help us heal afterwards. Being able to have a relationship and trust others again after that damage has been done is part of trauma recovery. It's phase 3. It's all about trauma, reintegration, and connection. We can't fully do that if we can't trust our community enough to let our guard down. So here's how we see that play out. Our defense system has 3 levels. Number 1 is the social engagement level. When we first start to get danger cues, we turn around and we look to each other for comfort. It's where we seek each other out, we call for help, we're looking for someone to come to our aid. And if no one comes when we call, or if the danger is deemed life-threatening and is too immediate, then we turn to level 2, which is our fight or flight response. And at this phase, the instinct is either to fight the danger or to run and just remove yourself from the situation. But if the level 2 response fails, then the level 3 response is to freeze or collapse. At this level, our bodies basically do everything they can to endure the experience while experiencing as little energy as possible, while getting and sustaining as little damage as possible. At this point in that phase, your danger assessment system has judged that the experience or what's happening is inevitable, and our best use of energy is to preserve it for recovery should we survive the event. So here is an excerpt that I thought was really fascinating and really helped with explaining some of this freeze response. So here's an excerpt from Exploring the Human Freeze Responses to Threat Stressors by Norman B. Schmidt, J. Anthony Ritchie, Michael J. Zolvinsky, and John K. Maynor. Similar to the fight or flight response, a freeze response is believed to have adaptive value. In the context of a predatory attack, some animals will freeze or play dead. This response is often referred to as tonic immobility and includes motor and vocal inhibition with an abrupt initiation and cessation. Ethologists have documented non-volitional freeze responses in several animal species. Freezing in the context of an attack seems counterintuitive. However, tonic immobility may be the best option when the animal perceives little chance of escaping or winning in a fight. So, for example, tonic immobility may be useful when additional attacks are provoked by movement, or when immobility may increase the chance of escaping, such as when a predator believes the prey to be dead and releases it. Despite evidence suggesting that tonic immobility may be a key facet of the alarm reaction, freezing has received very little scientific attention in humans. One exception is the PTSD rape literature, wherein several studies have described a rape-induced paralysis that appears to have many of the same features of tonic immobility. This literature suggests that a relatively high percentage of rape victims feel paralyzed and unable to act despite no loss of consciousness during the assault. Since fear, predation, contact, and restraint are common to both rape and induction of tonic immobility in animals, it has been concluded that these phenomena are essentially isomorphic, which means essentially from the same origin or the same pathway. When our defense system detects threat or danger via the sensory information around us, it begins to get our sympathetic nervous system all riled up. We start to get jumpy and we start to feel the need to get away from whatever that stimulus is. Our conscious mind is almost never the first one on the scene with assessment of danger, but it's also our meaning maker and our story projector. Our conscious mind really wants to assign meaning and a narrative to what's going on so that it can predict and project the future. The brain loves patterns. It really wants to and needs to know what to expect. So something as simple as a shift in hunger or temperature can cause us to create a story about the feelings in our body that we notice but can't explain. So this could play out in a situation where you're in a room with another person and your body has anything going on that it's alerting to a change or a need, and you could correctly assign that feeling or whatever is going on to the other person in the room because you don't know why else you would feel that way. Even though it could be something just as little as the position that you're sitting in, you had a little fold in your small intestine and it pinched it just a little and you needed to shift positions. So you started to feel icky and shifted because you were uncomfortable, but you thought that the other person was weird. Isn't that bizarre? Because you're not conscious of these bodily monitors and what they're reading, your brain just reaches for reasons. And it's really interesting to try to think about some of the ways that might happen. But the more our bodies are hyper alert to cues and potential threat, the more likely we are to have these bodily sensations that don't make sense to us. The more that we may have these really odd or intrusive narratives in our minds. So let's get along a little further into the body and figure out what's exactly happening with these systems while our brains are making up these stories. What's funny is it seems like there's always these binary dichotomous systems that are warring for the upper hand. And, that could possibly be why it seems like a lot of people like to think in black and white. We have the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system. One or the other. And the somatic nervous system is your voluntary one. That's the one where you choose, you control. The autonomic nervous system is a control system that acts largely unconsciously and regulates bodily functions such as the heart rate, digestion, respiratory rate, pupillary response, urination, and sexual arousal. With the ANS system, you have the sympathetic side and the parasympathetic side. So another binary either or system. The sympathetic nervous system goes way back to Galen, who was a Greek physician, philosopher, and surgeon way back and died in the year 200 in the Roman Empire. And he called it that because sympathy means with the emotions. And so it kind of felt like it was going with and forward. So almost like the gas pedal and amps us up for action. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, acts kind of as the brakes. It's the side of the autonomic nervous system, again, out of your control, autonomic nervous system that supports the health, growth, and restoration. So our vagus nerve is a central component to that restore system, but can also be recruited for defense in that last line when freeze or collapse comes up. So, the vagus nerve runs from the brainstem down the core of the body and is composed of about 80% sensory nerves. That's a lot. One of its main functions is basically that internal systems monitor. So it's got all those connections to your heart, your lungs, your intestines, and it's getting readings from all of those on efficiency and needs for each of these systems. It's also connected to your hearing, facial, and vocal muscles and controls some of the motor nerves there as well. So, the control that the vagus nerve has over the face, although it's not the only facial nerve, has a social and community function in that it actually sends the readings from inside us back out to our faces to express what we're feeling internally. And not just like I'm feeling sad, but like my body has needs and it comes out on my face. So we actually read these things in the faces of others. We don't always know what it means, but we can see if someone's uneasy. We can see needs and tension and all sorts of things like that. We can also see when the faces of others are relaxed and open. And so when we see that in other people, we have kind of an added layer of safety that helps reassure that those around us have also confirmed that there's a lack of threat. Think about how much we communicate with our bodies and faces, how much the actual meaning of a sentence can change based on the body language, tone, inflection that someone says those words with. We can tell when someone's smile or mood is genuine based on the readings that we're getting off the signals from their vagus nerve. So I just think that's really fascinating. When the vagus nerve is activated for that last line of defense, it slows everything down to conserve energy. It's kind of like, oh, hang on, slow it all down. It also blocks out certain wavelengths of sound and our ability to verbalize. So I'm not sure if you've ever been in a confrontation or a fight, especially with like your abuser. So mostly you're probably the one getting yelled at or on the defensive side. But I always thought that I was just kind of a really shitty listener or just broken because I would have trouble like keeping track of what was being said to me. But there's actually a legitimate reason for that. The facial branch of the vagus nerve has control over muscle tone around the eyes and around the middle ear. And when the vagus nerve is in defense mode, we see a flattened affect, which is expression or emotion on the face, and a lack of tension around the eyes. So, when someone fake smiles, it's because the tension in the eyes. We also lose our ability to hear details. What's interesting is the lack of tone in the middle ear actually like kind of down tunes us so that we're more attuned to lower frequencies, which we attribute or connect with danger. So we're actually kind of tuning into those signs of danger. And so if you're in an argument with someone, you definitely can lose your ability to hear and speak and express yourself clearly in a really physical, legitimate way. In some ways, the system is really like this analogy of a horse and rider. And I honestly, when I heard this analogy, it really made so many things click for me. I explained it a little bit in a live video, but I want to go back because it's really important. Our conscious mind and our voluntary nervous system is the rider, and our unconscious mind and our body is the horse. And as long as everything's going okay, and we have kind of normal things going on, everything that we've trained together to do, the horse and rider are going to get along just fine. They're going to be trotting along. The rider is going to feel like they're in control. And the horse is going to listen and let the rider be in control as long as that's going okay. But when the horse senses danger, like it sees a snake or it thinks it sees a snake, or there's a thunderstorm or something like that going on, we find out really quickly who's really in control. And it's the horse. It's the horse, okay? The rider really cannot regain control until that horse has regained safety and stability, till we've removed the threat, until we've given the horse a chance to calm down. And I'm not a horse expert, so I don't know specifically if this is exactly true for every horse trainer. However, I do know a thing about spooked animals and spooked people. And so we could kind of imagine that once that animal or your body is spooked and activated, some things that might work also might work for things that would work for a spooked animal. So we could say a soft voice that's soothing and non-threatening, purposeful and calm physical touch, maybe a somewhat enclosed or protected physical space, nice heavy blanket, maybe something nice to drink or eat so you didn't feel like you had that going on too. What we're going to do is we're going to use this horse and rider information. We're going to use our ANS and our SNS and all these different systems. We're going to use all the information that we learn from it and translate that over and use it to our advantage while we're working on trauma. One of the repercussions of adverse life experiences, especially during childhood, is that threat response system becomes hypersensitive, or it becomes inappropriately reactive towards the wrong things. The survival-based lower level of the brain and the nervous system take control, ready to protect the body at the first sign of danger, while the thinking, learning, and reflecting upper portion of the brain is muted. It's on standby. And if we're going to exist beyond survival mode, or if we're going to have really much chance in engaging in our lives at all, we're going to have to flip that. We need to quiet the alarm system and bring that upper part of the brain back online. So, how do we do that? Obviously, it's easier to just say that, but it's a lot harder to go, okay, well, how do I actually calm myself back down? How do I reteach my body not to react to those things so that I can stay and think clearly, stay in the moment, and engage with life on my terms and my choices? Essentially, it's skills building. And that's really cool, but it's also really hard because that means it takes practice. There's probably going to be some failure. It's not really failure when you're going to keep trying because, it takes time to get muscle memory and it takes time to form habits. It takes time to rewire things. There are some tools that are nearly universal, and then there's going to be some tools that are highly specific to you. And that's awesome because you're going to need both if you're going to tackle this. One of the most universal tools that we can do is use our breathing. As I talk more about what we're doing with our breath, it would be really cool if you just start to notice your breathing. Don't do anything to change it. Just notice. Pay attention to your breath. It's really hard to do sometimes. As I was writing the episode, I had a therapy appointment, and it was really interesting. During the appointment, I started to get really, really panicky feeling. I was just recapping the week, which wasn't particularly stressful or anything really out of the ordinary. It was stressful, but it wasn't nothing extra really. But my chest just started to feel more amped, and then my speech started to feel more pressured, and like I just needed to get stuff out. I didn't even know what it was. And I guess if I could describe it, like kind of a crackly feeling, like electrical in my chest. And so basically what was happening is my horse was getting spooked. For some reason, there was just something going on that triggered some sort of response or a danger reaction or something to my threat response system. And so I, of course, find this incredibly frustrating because even though I know there is no making it or arriving or time where we get to where we don't need help anymore or we don't need any compassion or gentleness with ourselves, but I have a hard time giving myself grace. So I was getting really frustrated. The worse it got, and the more frustrated I got, it just kept getting, I was like internally just really upset. And of course he noticed, and I was just like, this is so frustrating, like so fucking frustrating. Feel really stupid. And even with everything that I know, this is still happening, and he asked me, he's like, do you want to feel this way? And I'm like, no. And he's like, okay, so if you could choose to feel differently right now, you would? And I'm like, yeah. And it kind of started to sink in, and he saw my face start to relax. It's really tough because if you're not in control and your horse is running away, it can feel really embarrassing. It can be frustrating. It can be humiliating. And it can feel like it's your fault or that you have something to be ashamed about, but there's really not anything to be ashamed about. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. When that horse gets spooked, a thunderstorm came out of nowhere. That's not your fault. So we breathe for a little while, and focusing on your breath can be really difficult to keep there. Your brain just wants to go a million other places constantly. So I sat there, and Dustin, who is my therapist, talked calmly, and he invited me to close my eyes if I felt safe. And I did, because it really wasn't anything that I could identify. It was just so much pressure. And then he tells me, there is no right way to breathe. And I had to laugh a little bit because it was just like, I'm in the middle of writing this episode, and some of what I'm writing is specifically about breathing techniques and different ways to do it. And, if you're trying to do a specific technique, there is kind of a right and a wrong way to do it. But the point of this and what we're doing is not to be perfect or anything like that, especially when we're in the middle of crisis. The point is just to start somewhere. So right now, there is no right or wrong way to breathe. We're just going to breathe, and we're going to learn about breathing, but we're not going to feel bad, or we're not going to feel silly for not having a ton of control over our breathing and breath at first. So I also recently had posted some videos about a couple of holds that can be really helpful if the horse starts to run away, because it can kind of feel a little bit safe or maybe protective or caring. I'm not really sure what exactly it is, but we're learning a lot about those things, so that's always amazing. So the first one is called the hug hold, and we're just going to start with our arms out, and then we're going to take our right hand and we're going to cross it and put it under our chest, or not under our chest. I put it under my chest because I have boobs. You're basically wrapping it around the heart and kind of cupping, and then you just bring your other arm and just holding yourself and taking some breaths and just relaxing and breathing. So the other hold is the head and heart, or the heart and belly. And you could easily call these two or just one with two positions. It seriously does not matter as long as you figure out what helps for you. The head and the heart pose is just your right hand on your forehead with the palm side in, and your left hand over your heart. And you just sit there and breathe. And the second position, the heart and belly, means you're just going to move your right hand down and place it on your tummy, right around the level of your navel. In any of these positions, it is helpful to know a thing or two about the different styles of breathing and what those benefits can be. There is chest breathing and diaphragmatic breathing. And so, of course, I had to rewrite this section after our therapy session to redo a little bit of the wording, because I definitely tend to see things in black and white and right and wrong. And it's a good reminder that we all need to start somewhere. So, diaphragmatic breathing plays an important function because it fully engages all of the parts of the lungs. Often when we're going about our day and we're breathing, we are doing it a lot more shallowly than we realize. Each time we fully exhale and inhale, we're pushing out all that carbon dioxide and making room for a fresh set of fully oxygenated air for the lungs. Your diaphragm is a muscle that kind of goes across the bottom of your rib cage, and it kind of seals up the bottom and creates a vacuum chamber. That means when you flex your diaphragm, it's kind of pulling downwards, and your lungs are pulled open and they fill up with fresh air. And as soon as you relax your diaphragm, the carbon dioxide laden air gets to flow back out. But when you fully engage your diaphragm, that means that it's pulling down, which means your stomach and intestines and belly and fat and everything else has to have some place to go. So it goes out. So your belly expands when you're doing diaphragmatic breathing. It's going to vary for everyone how much, but the point is not to breathe. What you're doing is you're breathing and pushing out your tummy. Basically, what this means is you're going to look chubby every time you breathe for the most part. So breathing like this is probably going to feel awkward at first, but don't worry about it, because learning new things is awkward and we're growing, and that's what we're doing. So lean into it. We're going to go back to the autonomic nervous system, and we're just going to sit and breathe while we talk about it. So the ANS system, that autonomic nervous system, exists in those two parts. We have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The Sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight responder. The parasympathetic nervous system tells the body that it's safe to rest and digest, okay? So each time we inhale, we are activating the sympathetic nervous system. And every time we exhale, we are activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which is another mind-blowing system that we are switching back and forth to constantly. With each breath, we're switching back and forth, which is just mind-blowing because it's something that happens, again, so seamlessly. Think about when you're in bed at night and you hear a noise at the door and you do that sharp inhalation of breath and you listen for the all clear, and you're going to fill up your lungs with the max amount of oxygen, and your heart rate increases and you're ready to either fight something off or run away or, grab a weapon. But you sit and your heart is pounding and you're tense and you're sitting there ready, and you're probably making like those tiny little inhales where you're like, and, barely trying to exhale because you don't want to make any noise. Like maybe this is just me. I don't know. But you're trying to be careful not to make too much noise. And then your cat runs in the room and you exhale and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to kill that cat. I mean, you're not, but you feel like you want to because it scared the crap out of you. But when you do that nice big sigh of relief, your body relaxes, or it starts to, and your breathing starts to change back into a different pattern where you are lengthening your exhales. And this is happening without you even noticing. But your breath starts to even back out and lengthen those exhales again. And maybe if you're lucky, you can calm down enough to go back to sleep. And so one of the things about the bottom-up trauma-informed styles of treatment that we talked about in the last episode is that we can use this information to our advantage. We can use it to teach our bodies how to return to the base and restore functioning to our parasympathetic nervous system. So this is the one where our rest and digest systems come back online. And so it's not just sleeping and eating. It's also reproduction, learning, and bonding. So think about all the different things where we're going to need that to happen. The parasympathetic nervous system also supports the prefrontal cortex in rational activities like planning and decision-making and willpower. Think about that. If the parasympathetic nervous system has damage or has undergone trauma or is over-responsive or inappropriately responsive, you're probably going to have some issues in a lot of those areas, and that's okay. Your parasympathetic nervous system has just learned some things, and you need to teach it how to be safe again. Okay, so to reiterate, with a deep breath in, you're speeding up. Deep breath out, slowing down. The ratio to speeding up and slowing down is called your heart rate variability. And a 60 beat per minute heart rate is really not 1 beat per actual second. It's really like 1.06, 0.91, 0.02, 0.94. And that's not by chance. That's not because we're just not exactly perfect. It's because your heart is responding to your nervous system's readings on your current environment and your breathing's changing. You're basically this supercomputer that adapts to your external systems or the external forces around you. Heart rate variability is one way that we measure how resilient that system is. Is your heart actually slowing down with the exhales? How much? As the circumstances change, how does the SNS and PNS system respond? Is it doing it the way it should or the way you want it to? Doing these deep belly breaths and breathing diaphragmatically helps us to engage and consciously focus on the part of the cycle that we can control. As we work on our breath, our body starts to respond. Poor heart rate variability means we have a lack of fluctuation in the heart's response to breathing. If you're experiencing difficulties or a low responsiveness in your HRV, recovery after physical activities might take longer. Having trouble going to sleep at night, tossing and turning throughout the night, waking up earlier than usual or later than usual. You could have a lack of appetite. I mean, think about it. If you're not in digest mode and digesting food, you're not going to be hungry. Some of the medications that are offered these days also affect your heart rate variability and have been shown to decrease it. It's really something that you should talk to your doctor about and your healthcare provider if you have access to that. The heart rate variability that you have can be improved through a wide variety of modalities. A lot of the research is done for athletes and by athletes, and so it's really geared towards people who are really active. And if the only way to tweak our HRV is long distance running, then there's a lot of us who are in trouble. And I don't just mean that my lazy butt who's able-bodied can't get up and doesn't want to run. I mean that not everyone physically can run. Some of us don't have legs or are paralyzed or may have some other physical disability or something else or an allergy going on that impacts our options. And so we really need to dig deeper and look harder about the ways that we can help. So I wanted to come up with a few ways that aren't really geared towards physical fitness. So one of the first things that I saw on the list was cold showers. And at first I was like, oh, that's one thing I'm not going to do. And yet 4 of the past 5 days, I've done it. You don't have to do a full cold shower. It's really like the last 15 to 30 seconds of a hot shower, and you can get that same benefit. And at first I was like, this is not going to work. Why does this work? But I can kind of see how doing that's going to build up some of the flexibility in your heart rate. Going from warm to cold back to warm is going to mean that your heart is going to need to work and be flexible and adaptive. And you're doing that and putting that kind of testing and stress in a safe way, and you're not doing it in a situation or a time where you're under a lot of other pressure usually. I probably wouldn't be a good idea to do it when you're really stressed out and late for work. Or maybe it would be. I don't know. Maybe somebody can tell me. The other thing that you can do is improve your sleep quality, which obviously, I mean, don't we all do that? Don't we all want to do that? It's just super easy to get more sleep, right? You just go to bed early, which obviously is not the case because everything affects sleep. And we are definitely going to do a whole episode on sleep hygiene because there are a lot of ways that you can set yourself up for success, but it's not easy. And don't feel bad if you know that sleep is an issue for you and you know that it could be impacting your heart rate variability. Sleep is something that in our society is very, very difficult. We've got cell phones, we've got 24-hour schedules where people expect you to be on call or available at all times. We have things like a lot of artificial lighting everywhere we go. We have noise and activities and so many things going on that really impact our ability to get a good night's sleep. And so please, please do not hear that and think that, well, it's a lost cause. There's no point in trying. Yoga is something that people have found healing and gained therapeutic benefit from for years. However, Western science is really slow and super scared of anything that they can't immediately explain with science. Historically, many different cultures have used body movements and controlled breathing in more of a spiritual context and not directly for the healing of trauma, but we can easily look at how it translates. Think about these different modalities. It's not just yoga. We've got Tai Chi, Qigong, capoeira, kung fu, karate. Many of those modalities work with slow, controlled breathing and movements, and we're still figuring out the science and compiling the studies that back this stuff up. So stay tuned and keep on the lookout for that research because it's coming. Yoga in particular is one of the most researched in relation to trauma recovery, and it's really seeing a remarkable impact in trauma survivors and their ability to regain a sense of safety and process healing. It can be incredibly helpful for training your diaphragmatic breathing as well. We'll be having a good friend of mine, Tiffany Chapman, on to talk to us more about breathing as a yoga instructor and how that all works together very soon. She's both a suicide survivor and a trauma-informed yoga instructor. So if you have any questions in regards to that, definitely get them over to me so that I can make sure to get them in that episode. One of the first parts of safety and stability is to combat the shame and to just accept this stuff as needing to happen or needing healing in these areas. And I've addressed this many times in the past on the podcast and in different episodes. But I feel like shame is such a strong compulsion and it's such a strong damaging force that we almost can't talk about how much we need to let it go enough or how much we need to step away from shame. We have to understand that we are doing the best we can in each moment with the set of tools, the skills, the energy, the resources, and the strength, the community, all that stuff that we have. When we face crisis, our brains are not using logic and reasoning. It's that horse, and the horse responds in a real horse-like fashion. It bolts or it rears up, it kicks, it reacts like a frightened animal, and so do we. These lightning responses are responses to perceived threats, and it's really not your fault. What we do in the aftermath, as our brains are plagued by flashbacks and our bodies respond to those flashbacks, is also based on what was happening with our lizard brain and what it was commanding. Moral and logical brains are on mute. That section is not online. A lot of the things that we may have done to pick up the pieces after trauma also could be things that we're not proud of. I had to stop more than once during the writing and making of this episode just to kind of practice some of those holds and remind myself that I was doing the best that I could to bring myself back to the present and out of the cigarette smoke-filled, dingy, dark, single-wide trailer that haunts my dreams. I'm learning to walk forward without shame and leave it there. I still have it. I'm still struggling. This is not a road that happens overnight. It's not something that's easy. It's not something that you ever arrive at. We're all going to face it forever, but we can face it less and less, and we can get more and more tools. We can educate each other and help heal each other on this process, which is going to make an incredible difference in the way that we deal with the things that happen in the future. Bad stuff's always going to happen. It just will. It's just how life is. But the way that we learn to process it, the communities that we build while we're healing, those will impact the future in a beautiful and real way. I still struggle with feeling like I should have done better. And that's why it's so important to keep learning and keep talking about this stuff and not give up. We have to look at each other honestly and through that trauma-informed lens and speak life into each other. It's incredibly hard not to be overwhelmed by the shame of the things that I did to survive. But honestly, when I have told some other really smart trauma-informed people, they were pretty unsurprised. The same way I'm not shocked or disgusted when someone tells me what they did and when they went along with their abusers too. We can do this. We can heal from trauma. Life with mental illness may not be pretty, but it really can be beautiful.